Hey everybody, so this is the first of the 4 recordings, 2 of which are for the recalibration period, and 2 of which are for the classes that we were supposed to meet during spring break. So again, what you should do is, well, with each of these videos, you'll have a set of questions that accompany them that I will send out and post together with these videos. And you should respond to 2 of them. So the dates again are, well, today, which is a bit late now, but so March 30th, April 1st, which will be April Fool's Day, April 13th, and April 15th. Those are the days, roughly, that I will be posting the videos and the sets of questions. And you should respond to 2 of these pairs by April 17th, as well as posting to 2 of the 4 blogs that I will be posting for these dates, these same dates, which are not this, these are kind of our irregular blogs, our asynchronous class meetings. These videos and these questions and these blogs for these particular dates represent our asynchronous meetings, which means those are the meetings that we're not all in the same place at the same time. And that's just, again, to kind of create a sort of compromise between the recalibration period and the truncated spring break. It makes a lot more sense to me and to certain other people that I've talked to in the department and whatnot, to use the days of our recalibration period rather than shortening spring break. But with the understanding that some people might actually need the recalibration period to get equipped to participate in this new the new way of going forward. Anyway, so with this video, I just kind of want to talk about a couple of the literary devices and themes that run through Shadowbond that are essential to its composition. The first of these being intertextuality. So to understand intertextuality, to introduce you to it if you don't know what it is, I am going to read you a description of it from this, a very useful book. And then I will switch to my screen so you can see my screen, and I will write out what I just read, the description, and then I'll talk about it briefly. And then I will talk about how it relates to, and then we'll move into a couple other themes. This intertextuality is not a theme per se of Shadowbond, although you could kind of consider it as a theme, but it's really just a device that Shadowbond is using to create more meaning out of itself than just the surface would suggest. So let me just read you this introduction, this introductory description of what intertextuality means. What I'm going to read from this book, A Glossary of Literary Terms, is a little bit complex, so I want to read that and then type it out and then to give you a simpler version and then just talk about how it relates to Shadowban. So the description, the definition that this book gives is that the term intertextuality, popularized especially by Julia Kristeva, who's a very famous critical theorist, very famous for a theory of objection and stuff. Worth checking out, but it's not important to know who she is for this. But just to start over, the term intertextuality, popularized especially by Julia Kristeva, is used to signify the multiple ways in which any one literary text is in fact made up of other texts, by means of its open or covert citations and allusions, its repetitions and transformations of the formal and substantive features of earlier texts, or simply its unavoidable participation in the common stock of linguistic and literary conventions and procedures that are always already in place and constitute the discourses into which we are born. In Kristeva's formulation, accordingly, any text is in fact an intertext, the site of an intersection of numberless other texts, and existing only through its relation to other texts. Alright, so I know that's a little bit dense, a little bit heavy. I'm going to type it out for you. Term intertextuality, popularized by Julia Kristeva, is used to signify multiple ways in which any one literary text is in fact made up of other texts. By any means of its open or covert citations and allusions, its repetitions and transformations of the formal and substantive features of earlier texts, or simply its unavoidable participation in the common stock of linguistic and literary conventions and procedures that are always already in place and constitute the discourse is into which we are born. Increase Davis formulation accordingly. Any text is in fact an intertext. Site of an intersection of numberless other texts and existing only through its relation to relations to other texts. All right, so this is kind of a higher level definition of what this term means. Probably a bit more complex than we need to get right now, but it's worth noting. So, and within this kind of complex definition, I just want to address the idea of the common stock of linguistic and literary conventions and procedures. So what that's referring to is basically just the idea that every language is a system. It has rules, there's grammar, you have to spell words a certain way. Through conventional meanings, what that means is, meaning determined by convention kind of says, like, for example, the word dog. The word dog refers to a certain creature because we all agree that that pattern of sound refers to this creature. There's no natural connection between the word dog and the idea of a dog. There's no reason that the word dog couldn't represent the animal cat, except that we all agree that when we say dog, we think of, a four-legged beast with a wolf descendant with generally kind of more floppy ears, lapping tongue, so on and so forth, as opposed to a feline, or what have you. The word dog has meaning through convention, through use, through common agreement. And so in that sense, any text written in the English language is participating in the system, in the structure of the English language. Its meaning is derived through that structure of language. If writing a book in, say, Spanish, that book gets its meaning through the system of the Spanish language and through all of the meanings that come about through the common agreement of sound patterns in the Spanish language, referring to this, that, or the other thing. when it comes to the idea of a text getting meaning through literary conventions. That kind of means, if something is written in, say, that could refer to genres, for example. So if something is written in the horror genre and we accept it as being a horror novel, we have certain expectations from that novel. We expect often a kind of supernatural element. We expect it to deal with fear in some sense. We expect it to deal probably with some kind of threat of death, flirtation with death, and engagement with ideas of death or bodily harm. Horror almost always involves some kind of recognition of death, or that sort of thing. And so, a novel like Dracula, say, we understand that to be part of the horror genre, and that's part of where it gets its meaning, is that we understand it in a broader framework. So we can look at something like the movie Scream, say, right? Which basically takes place in the horror genre, and it plays with the conventions of the horror genre, the expectations of horror, and that's a large part of how a movie like Scream kind of lays claim to a certain kind of meaning. It subverts the expectations that we have from the horror genre. It plays with them, it toys with them, and the reason that has significance, the reason that the way the Scream plays, something like Scream, the movie Scream plays with certain cliches, the reason that has meaning is because we already have pre-established expectations, because it is part of the horror genre. So when it subverts those expectations, it takes on new meaning, because convention has already established certain roles, and it takes on its own meaning by plugging into this discourse of horror and doing something different with it. So we could go deeper into that, but again, that's just kind of an introduction to a more complex way of understanding intertextuality. For our purposes here, as far as talking about intertextuality in relationship to shadow bond, we should understand intertextuality as basically just the relationship or connection between texts, especially with regards to how the meaning of a text is shaped by its connection to another text or texts, using the term text loosely. And I say that because in the case of Shadowbond, a lot of the texts that are shaping the meaning of Shadowbond are not literary texts per se. Probably the most major confluence of texts in Shadowbond that serve to create a kind of combinatory complex of meaning in this novel is music, which is why I have been so strongly encouraging you all for the whole semester to listen to that Shadowbond playlist, because there's constant reference and allusion, direct and indirect, to all kinds of music in Shadowbond. And understanding that music is important to understanding the full meaning of the text that is Shadowbond of this book. And that's basically what we mean by, it's a great example of intertextuality, because the meaning of Shadowbond, its overall meaning, its overall import, is to a large extreme shaped by the meaning of the music that it references, the music that it incorporates. There are certain song lyrics that it incorporates, especially in the chapter headings, if you want to call them chapters. I don't know if I would necessarily consider these chapters per se, but I mean, even here you can see Summer Wine. That's page 5. That's a song by Nancy Sinatra, which is on the playlist. If you've listened to it, then it's one of the first like 5 songs, I think. But all throughout those little chapter headings, they frequently reference songs or are named after songs. Or are lyrics from songs. So like here, if you can't read that, that says "Without a Dream in My Heart," which is a lyric from Blue Moon. Blue moon, I saw you standing alone. Da, 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 without a dream in my heart, without a song of my own. I don't know if that's right, but you get the idea. Let's see. I mean, as you can see, Badlands. Badlands, that's the heading for page 12. That's a Bruce Springsteen song. Return to Cinder, I don't know if you can see that, but that's referring to an Elvis Presley song. And like Parker and Zima, they're traveling across country with their father's playlist. This long list of songs, and in a way, understanding those songs, we have an understanding of Parker and Zima's father, even if he's never present in the novel. And it gives us a deeper understanding of them as well. You might also think of songs in this novel, song titles, lyrics, as a kind of hyperlink. So like if you're on a web page and you see a hyperlink, like what does that mean? It's something you click on and it opens up a new page, it opens up a new website. It opens this whole other kind of world, if you will. It taps into another discourse. And we see that, and the first 20 pages or so, if you consider it in that way, this book is tapping into dozens of different discourses. We have, just opening up randomly to page 19, we have the Ramseys from Tennessee trying to figure out that what they've heard is a piece. So everybody is hearing different songs from the Twin Towers, which have appeared in the South Dakota Badlands. right? And we have this I guess this family, the Ramseys from Tennessee, trying to figure out that what they've heard is a piece by a Nile-born woman considered the greatest Arabic singer who ever lived, called Al Alal, which translates into English as the ruin. We can get all kinds of meaning out of that. If you know that song, if you know what that song means, you can probably get even more meaning out of it. And that follows kind of funnily an Egyptian family. The song that they hear, a Sunni family from Egypt, the Noors, spend several days on the internet to determine that what they've heard is Lost Highway by a long dead country star. And that's referring to Hank Williams. So there's this kind of crisscross. But if you don't understand that the title of that song, Lost Highway, and that country star is Williams, if you don't understand that, you're not getting the full meaning of that incident. That that the fact that, you know, if you've heard these two different songs that these two different families are hearing, and understand the significance of those songs and the meaning of those songs, then the fact that, you know, an Egyptian family is hearing Hank Williams, and this family from Tennessee is hearing this song by an Arabic singer called a born woman singing a song called All Allah. If you haven't heard those songs, you're not getting the full meaning, and that runs throughout the whole book, really. The more music you know that is alluded to, the greater is your understanding. So I would encourage you to treat the songs that you hear as kind of hyperlinks, in that when you come upon a reference to a song that you don't know, if possible, if time allows, then go to Spotify or YouTube and look up that song and give it a listen. And again, I've already supplied you with the playlist that somebody has created on Spotify. So if you have access to that and you can listen to that, all the songs are there. So you can go there and just listen to them there. And that would be the easiest course. But if you really want to understand the full depth of this novel, then you should listen to the songs, as many as you can. And there's probably more songs that are referenced in it than you can really listen to if you haven't already started, but you should do your best. Intertextuality is incorporated or employed in a lot of other ways. One such way, so another text that is referenced is the Double Elvis by Andy Warhol. I'll show you that if you don't know it. Actually, I'm going to show you that in a minute, in a few moments. Just keep in mind that the Double Elvis by Andy Warhol is another intertextual moment, if you will. There's reference to this silk screen painting by Andy Warhol that creates a double image of Elvis, and that's important. Doubling so another theme So intertextuality is not really a theme, it's a device that's used. But it is also a kind of theme, but not overtly. But a theme that runs throughout Shadowbond that's really important is the theme of, we'll say doubling, but it's really plurality of meaning. The doubling that is used, I think, represents a plurality of meaning. So we're seeing a kind of, the way that first manifests itself, I think, is in the doubling of the American narrative in a certain way. So just take a step back maybe and consider that the setting of this novel is America, but it's not the America we live in. I think when I was reading it, my first clue to that was on page 16. There's actually another clue, which we'll get to in a second. But when I was reading this and I first became aware that this was not, okay, so bearing in mind that this novel was published in 2017, that means it was probably written 2014, 2015, probably. So before Trump era. But you know, the first sign that this is not an America in which Barack Obama is president is on page 16. Very simple, subtle. So after the towers appear in the Badlands, nobody knows what to do, and there's this little line that says, occasional demands from some quarters that the president should enter clash with counter demands that she wouldn't. All right. So that's really that's a major indication that this is not this is not our reality. It's not to say that there's not truth in it, but it's not our reality. It's another America, a fictionalized America. It's splintered off into another narrative, which might seem obvious just by virtue of this being a novel, but it's worth pointing out because there's a lot in this that is born out of our reality. I mean, the Twin Towers, their appearance here is obviously weird and fantastical, and nobody's sure what to make of it. But you know that they came down, that there was an attack, and that it has extreme significance on who we are as a nation today. You know, that implies that there's the America in this novel and the America in which we live. They're still joined. There's still kind of a narrative connection to them, but they've splintered off. And we will continue to see kind of splinterings, doublings, and pluralities throughout, as represented with the Elvis character and the Warhol painting, which we'll come back to in a second. I will show you that piece of art in a few moments, but I just want to double back to an entry point to get there. So that what I just referenced, the fact that within this novel there's a woman who is president, which is, if nothing else, serves as a definite signifier that this is a kind of alternate reality, a reality that is rooted in our own. I think, in a way that's fair to say, it's rooted in our own, but it's splintered off. But there's actually an earlier signifier that this is not our reality. So Aaron, who is the driver with whom the story opens, he's driving along, and he's driving along the highway. He's on his regular route, and he sees the Twin Towers appear in the Badlands. And it says on page 6, from the cabin of his truck, he aims himself at anything westward that he can see 100 miles away, at the swath of blue crushing a horizon invaded by the slightest vapor of white. Not so much clouds, since there hasn't been a cloud in the sky, let alone rain, in forever. Highway 44 is draped with the flags of disunion that grow in number the farther west Aaron gets. So, I don't know how you took it when you first read it, but when I personally first read that line, before getting farther in the novel, flags of disunion, I thought that meant like Confederate flags, from the South kind of thing. Even though he's in the West, I thought it was a bit strange upon the first reading it that where he was, South Dakota is not the south of the country in terms of like Civil War South. But I just took that as being like Confederate flags. Of course, if you get a bit farther, you'll understand that flags of disunion aren't really referring to Confederate flags per se, but they're not referring back anyway to the Civil War that has happened over slavery, but they are perhaps indicative of an impending Civil War. We find going, as we read on, that there are like zones of disunion and that there's a splintering within the country, and that in this reality, hopefully not our own, hopefully not, but at least within the reality of Shadowbond, the American reality, they've splintered off into a chronology that might include an impending civil war. The country certain parts of the country are apparently trying to secede, and that might mean another civil war. What you should have read by today, up to page 85, we don't know the full details of what that means. All we know is that there are zones of the country that are trying to secede. And that's what those flags represent. We know that there's a woman president, and those are the first signs that before anything weird or magical happens, like before the Twin Towers appear with the stillborn twin of Elvis Presley living in them, it's clear that we're in an alternate reality just from those two things. So I think that's working out. Um, and this idea of doubling plurality, we see it throughout. We see it in various different places. Again, I mean, music is an essential part of this novel, and one of the first symbols of plurality of meaning, which is analogous to the plurality of meaning of America as an idea, America as a symbol. The something that is representative of that is a musical symbol. Specifically on page 17, well, I'll just read it and then I'll comment on it. On 17, the chapter heading is called I Long to Hear You. That's a lyric from the song called variously either O Shenandoah or Across the Wide Missouri. It's an old traditional song, and the Patterson family from Virginia, this is the song that they are hearing, and this is the comment that the book has to make about this song. So, in silence and from a distance, the gathering listens as much as it watches. So this is the gathering around the Twin Towers that have appeared in the South Dakota Badlands. There's music coming out, and there's this huge gathering of people for the obvious reason. I don't think it needs much explanation why many people would gather around, this phenomenon in the South Dakota. In the vacuum of what can be scientifically explained or sociologically defined, the music of the buildings provides the only explanation or definition of what has happened. The Patterson family of 4 from Virginia hears rising from the buildings O Shenandoah, once the name, derived from the Oneida word for the antlers of a deer, of an Iroquois chief whose daughter fell in love with a white explorer. So that's basically the narrative that this song describes. And by the way, if you go to course documents on the blackboard, you will find 4 different versions of this song, all telling the same story, but I would say different interpretations. Definitely musically different to an extent. It goes on to say, so now this kind of ephemeral narrator of the novel says about this song, he calls it, or they call it, the Great National Metamorphosis Song. Originally a musical news bulletin from the American future, sent back to the rest of the 19th century by fortune hunters from across the wide Missouri. O Shenandoah has 100 songs in one, depending on who has sung or heard it at a given moment over the past 200 years. Pioneer song, sailing song, slave song, Confederate song, a French trader's love song for his bride. All right, so the point of that is that everybody who hears this song gets a different meaning out of it. Everybody who sings this song, the way that they sing it, the way that they interpret it, gives new meaning to it. And that is really representative of the idea of America. Like we talk about the idea of the American dream, and It's really this evolving idea. Everybody has a different interpretation of it, really. We can put some kind of odd outline to it, and we can talk about it in vague terms. But if we start to push back against any definition of it, it becomes necessarily more complex. It has to. You can't talk about anything in abstract terms and then try to concretize it and specifics and expect that meaning to hold. Things change in practice. The abstract does not translate into the pragmatic, the abstract does not translate into a living reality, right? The living reality of the individual alters the interpretation of an idea, of a text. So, we find this kind of analogy between, somebody hearing the song O Shenandoah, their life experience that they bring to it when they hear it is going to influence their interpretation of it. Similarly, an individual's life experience is, if that individual in America has a relationship with America, that individual's life experience is going to alter the way that they interpret the idea of America, the way that they engage with, America as a symbol, as a myth, the American narrative, and then going back to the whole thing, the founding documents, the founding fathers, the way that we interpret those is based on life experience. That is represented in the way that this song has a plurality of meaning based on who is singing it, who is hearing it, etc. Right. Sticking with this idea of plurality of meaning, I think that this book, right, it through its motif of doubling, and we'll talk about what that word motif means. We'll talk about that in one of our class sessions. Not quite. Motif is not quite the same as a theme. Let's just say that for now and leave that. And with the thought of coming back to it. But there's a motif of doubling in this novel. We see it with the towers, obviously. To some degree with Parker and Zima. We see it in the chapter headings. So like on page 85, the chapter heading is Only Children Right Speaker. Page 86 is Only Children Left Speaker. And that's referring to Parker and Zima and kind of two different angles of interpreting their familial situation. But yeah, we constantly see doubling throughout, and we see it with this idea of the union and the disunion that seems to be happening in this reality. This the nation is splintering, and therefore the idea of America is splintered. There's not a cohesive agreement about what America symbolically means, right? So on page 53, we get a hint about this. And we also get the title of the book. And on one of these later videos, we'll return to that aspect of it. I'm going to read it here now, the part that encompasses the title of the book. But we'll return to that, at least from a different angle, later. So on page 53, Zima says to her brother, "What do you mean, no?" As they near the Texas border, I-40 turns into a so-called throughway, federal interstate protected by chain fence, trespassing rupture territories marked by disunion flags. Since checking out of the Barcode Motel, Parker and Zima have heard on 3 different occasions of a rumored thoroughfare unmarked on any map. A secret highway called the Shadowbahn that cuts through the heart of the country from one end to the other with impunity. Crossing friendly Union and hostile disunion territories alike. Allegedly, the secret highway runs from an undisclosed western point to an undisclosed eastern, as though there is no America at all of physicality or fact, only the America of the mind. Whatever America that might be, to whatever mind might ponder it. Right, so that seems to me just a cutting passage, and cutting in that it's cutting through the symbol of America. I think that we should always try to understand America as both an idea and a place. Right. So there's the actual physical geography of America, from the Atlantic Ocean on the east to the Pacific on the west, and everything in between. To the north we have Canada, to the south we have, Mexico, the Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico, etc. So we have these natural boundaries, and this land that has been called America bound within it, and the whole history attending that. But from that, there arises a kind of symbolic value. There's a mythology of America. Um, different ideas of American values, of the American dream. These are all kind of swirling around one another at all times, competing with one another to some degree. And in the book, we see this idea of competing interpretations of America manifesting itself in, at this point, whatever is happening with the Union and disunion territories. For that to happen, there's obviously a slippage of meaning, that the populace, the people that live within the natural landscape that is America, they've ceased to agree on what America means as an idea. And a further representation of this, or at least another analogy of this, is in the figure of Jesse. Right. So Jesse being Jesse is the stillborn twin of Elvis Presley. And there's a certain reality, there's certain truth to that. Elvis Presley, in our reality, he had a stillborn, a twin that was stillborn, and that his twin died upon birth. But in the reality of this novel, Elvis died. Jesse Presley lived on in some branch of reality, and has reemerged with the Twin Towers reemergence in the South Dakota Badlands. And the figure of Jesse and the coupling and the pair of Jesse Presley and his in this reality, his stillborn brother Elvis Presley, we find kind of it's another symbol of the separation from physical reality with symbolic reality. Jesse within the reality of this narrative is constantly trying to cope with you know the symbolic meaning of his brother. It's all a bit funky, right? It's he's aware of his brother's. Jesse Presley is aware of Elvis's symbolic meaning, even though, and the chronology from which Jesse is coming, Elvis never really existed. That is, he died as he was a stillborn infant, and yet, at least at page 85, Jesse still has this kind of awareness that the people outside the tower would. He has this notion that they're clamoring for his brother, who existed in their world, but not in his. But he still has this kind of understanding of the symbolic meaning of Elvis, and that's kind of one of the swirling pluralities, the labyrinthine, um, you know, one of the labyrinthine complexities of this book. Uh, you know, there's a dislocation that occurs, uh, which I think is kind of part of the magic of it. It's a little bit hard to place Jesse in a reality, but we emotively, I think we must accept his reality on some level, if for no other reason than that it contradicts the reality into which he appears, with as in some ways closer to our reality, in some ways further away from it. In some ways, that is to say, in some ways, the reality into which the Twin Towers and Jesse spontaneously appear. In some ways, that reality is closer to ours. In some ways, it is further away than the other alternate reality from which Jesse comes. So I'm going to put this picture up. While I read this passage, just as something to think about. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, that I wanted to double back on that. That's why I put this aside for a moment. This is the Double Elvis by Andy Warhol. There are other versions that have even more Elvises, but this is the one that is basically referred to in this passage. So on page 74, Jesse has ascended to the top of the towers, or he, at this point, he is ascending. On page 74, the chapter heading is Into the Past. It says, two of them side by side, or so Jesse thought when the photographer took the double image all those years ago, wanting, as the photographer always did, to make the most of his superstars. The double image reproduced silk-screened in variations of color. Both twins postured with 6-gun drawn from a holster as though an Western gunfight. No cowboy hat, long sleeve buttoned shirt and boots and jeans double belted with holster slung low on the right hip. Looking not square into the camera, but ever so slightly off-right. This image that Jesse now surveys is silver and black. But for the first time since that photo shoot decades before, Jesse realizes what he never realized, that they never were double images of him at all. So, you and me then, baby bro, he says, staring at the identical twins glistening in the tower rooftop portal. It was you and me all along, huh? Never, he realizes, was just me, and me at all. Should have known. Andy always was up to something, manipulative little albino twat. He knew all along it was you right there beside me. And as Jesse steps through the glowing door on the tower rooftop into another place in another time, he lapses mid-step from the consciousness of one split moment into the consciousness of another. Through his head blows a black, soundless wind that, for the first time, justifies every moment of him. He barely can be sure now that he's ever been in the tower at all. There, beneath the ceiling of the world, where nothing lies in the distant dark but moonscape and the twinkling of thousands of flaming lights gathered at the tower's base. For the first time since that original flashing glimpse outside the 93rd floor window of the airliner coming toward him, he's ecstatic. The towers and their future vanish behind him. The single fiery siren note that has beckoned him goes up in its own flames. Embers of incinerated music scatter on the rooftop from where, seconds ago, crossing a threshold similar to the one from which Sheriff Ray Jardine recoiled more than 100 floors below, Jesse the Shadowborn jumped, and, in the eyes of anyone else who might have been on the tower rooftop to witness it, disappeared into thin air. All right, so there's this kind of awareness that springs into Jesse's mind, or at least this is one way of reading this. This passage represents an awareness of duality that arises in Jesse's mind. Aware of the living reality of his brother that is as valid as his own reality, as his own chronology. And we can follow that thread to be representative of, our own, representative of truths in our own narrative. That is to say that there are differing, even competing interpretations of America as an idea that are equally valid. Um, they are there's a plurality of meaning in the American idea. Positive, negative, it doesn't matter. There's they're equally valid. But another way to sort of look at this is that certain narratives that we would like to think are dead or forgotten are still alive. Um, so, like, one way we see that is with the sheriff, Ray Jardin, when she goes. If you remember, she tries to go into one of the. She enters the towers. She tries to go into um, one of the elevators, and she basically when the elevator door opens, she sees on page 65. I'm not going to read it, but the door opens and she sees like a window into a scene from, I guess, what we can assume is her own past. Um, she sees a mob of people gathered around, basically eliminating, and this dark history of America is brought to life again. It's not dead. It's not forgotten. We might like to think that it is, but the fact that it happened, things like the racial discord, slavery, all of that happened with this country. It shaped this country, uh, and even if in some ways we moved beyond it, it's still a constitutive element, and we can't move beyond it if we don't recognize it. And I think that is also incorporated in this. Even just the fact that Jesse, jumping into his own window, paralleled with Sheriff Ray Jardin, seeing her window and fleeing. There's an alignment that is created through that, and I'll end this video just by suggesting that Elvis, his twin brother, is a particularly potent symbol. It's a potent symbolic pair because there's so much discourse that surrounds Elvis as there's a lot of conversation and debate about what Elvis represented. To some, Elvis was a racist that appropriated songs from black artists and profited off of them. To others, he was part of a system that appropriated or exploited songs of black artists, but he himself was not a racist. Rather, he was a kind of cultural pioneer that opened up. You know, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that some would think of him as opening up a new kind of consciousness. The rock and roll era. Everything that followed that, the youth, kind of youth rebellions, and this a new way forward. I mean, in some way, like a lot of what happened with the '60s is rooted in Elvis. Rock and roll. Not just him. There were others, but he was a pivotal point in this. Shaking his hip on television and what have you. Like that. That was a turning point. Uh, for better or worse. Um, there are certain ways that because he was white, he was able to bring that to the cultural fore in a way that the people from whom he got a lot of his music weren't able to. And that's not to say that he's justified in that. Um, but, it can be argued whether he is at fault or the society in which he found his success was at fault. Either way, I want to leave it off there. This has gone on probably longer, I think much longer than I intended it. But let me know what you think. I'm gonna form some questions to attach to this video um, about, I guess, about this video. Some of the things I've rambled about here, and some of the things to some of the things in Shadowbun that I've been referring to, or other places in the text that represent these kind of themes or devices. Anyway, I'm going to end this. Yeah, let me know what you think.